Welcome to another exciting Rockjumper virtual tour, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Nikki, and it's an honor to co-host today's webinar together with our South African Managing Director, Keith Valentine. Today we'll be traveling to South Africa, which is quite simply one of the most pleasurable birding destinations in the world, and which offers unrivaled wildlife viewing, world-class infrastructure, and unbeatable value for money. This makes birding tours in South Africa a popular choice amongst birders across the world. South Africa also boasts the most regionally endemic bird species of any African country, as well as a rich seabird collection and vast numbers of more widespread, yet no less spectacular African birds and wildlife. Add to this the rich botanical heritage, fine food and wines, friendly people, fascinating history, and the scenic splendor of Africa's most varied nation. And it's not hard to see why South Africa is our most popular birding destination. Greg de Klerk is our guest speaker today, taking us on a voyage to the most iconic wildlife reserve on the planet, namely the Kruger National Park. Greg has been expertly guiding for Rockjumper for 5 years, having spent 14 years in the Kruger in his 21 years of guiding. Greg, I'm pretty envious that you've seen pangolins in the Kruger, as they are still an elusive sighting for me. Welcome, Greg, and take us to the Kruger.
Thanks, Nikki, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Kruger National Park, South Africa's iconic national park. So the Kruger Park is based in South Africa. If you look closely just to the bottom tip of Africa here, you can see a highlighted blue panel. Once again, just towards the very bottom, you've got South Africa, slightly closer in. And Kruger Park will be based on the northeastern edge, pretty much stretched along the line here, as you'll see in the next slide. South Africa, in a nutshell, has quite a few national parks, but Kruger is by far the biggest of them. All right. It currently sits at 19,485 kilometers squared, which is roughly about 7,523 miles squared, a conservation area, which is roughly the size of Israel or Belgium, the entire country. It is pretty incredible. It's Africa's 7th largest park, and it's a trans-frontier park with the Limpopo National Park and also Gonera Zoo in Zimbabwe. And it is internationally recognized for its array of fauna and flora. The park itself, just a simple map of the park, you can see it's quite a lot longer than it is wide. It's roughly about 65 kilometers wide and about 470 kilometers long. You can travel if you really need to, about half the park in a day. There are speed restrictions in place. But the best is to actually take roughly about 7 to 10 days if you wanted to travel the entirety of the park. So the boring stuff, just to get it out the way quickly, the park was established in 1898 by President Paul Kruger. It was known as the Sabi Game Reserve at the time, and it was established to manage the decimation caused by overhunting by the early European settlers. In 1902, James Stevenson Hamilton became the local warden. His name in the local language is Skukuza, which is also now the main camp in Kruger National Park. In 1926, the National Parks Act was proclaimed, and as a result, Sabi Game Reserve and the Shingwedzi Game Reserve merged to form the initial Kruger National Park. In 1927, they received their first self-drive guests. Their self-drives, they had 3 in the first year, and each individual paid £1. They were then taken on a pontoon across the river and into the park, where they were able to go and do their mammal watching and birding for the first time. Basically, the park is unique. It's fenced, and as a result, most people think it's like a zoo, but with the size, the fences are actually there to limit the impact of mammals coming into contact with humans and vice versa. And there are a lot of mammals. There's roughly 147 species of mammal in Kruger National Park, about 515 bird species, and 115 reptile species. As a result, this park has been seen as a pioneer of sustainable utilization. And they do a lot of work to make sure that the park is well maintained and that the animals never overrun the park and that people never take too much from it. There are conservation practices that are cutting edge. They've been involved in elephant contraception after they stopped culling in 1994. They've tried to reintroduce wild dogs and cheetahs quite successfully. There's been a lot of work and research of southern ground hornbills, and they're also doing quite a large amount of work following up on vultures, which have now become critically endangered. And then they're also the front runner to conservation protection and management on the continent, making sure that all these animals are protected. For example, the rhinos at the moment. So the Northern Kruger National Park, and what you're looking at is Lana Gorge, regarded by many as possibly the most beautiful point in Kruger National Park. So the northern section of the park, as you can see, is quite a long stretch, and it is dominated by a vegetation type known as Mopani felt. Now, Mopani felt normally occurs on granitic type soils. It's relatively poorly drained, and the area has only about 400 millimeters of rainfall a year. To give you a rough estimation, that should be about 35, I think it's 35 inches of rainfall. Temperatures up here are roughly about 40 degrees Celsius. You're looking at about 104 degrees Fahrenheit at the peak of summer as a maximum temperature. But you look at about 33 degrees Celsius as your average, so about 90 odd degrees Fahrenheit. There are also a few sedimentary deposits, and that gives rise to a large amount of forestry up in the north. And this in turn supports a sandfeld forest with a lot of fever trees, as you can see, what we know as a fever tree forest. And these habitats assist us with an incredible array of species. First up, the three-banded corsair, an uncommon resident within the dry woodlands. Racket-tailed rollers, normally found only into Namibia and very, very far north in South Africa. Most South African birders will travel far north to get these two. Dickinson's kestrel, they disperse into tropical savanna, particularly with baobabs, and love hunting in those areas. Crested guinea fowls, these guys favor the sandfelt. So where you saw those fever trees a few minutes ago, that's the favorite type of habitat for them. And they would also be in amongst the riverine vegetation. Tropical booby finds its southernmost range in the Northern Kruger National Park. And then this is actually now known as a brown-necked parrot. Unfortunately, I got the wrong name for it at the time. But these guys are also found only in the northern end of the park and in a couple of small other reserves in South Africa. They are associated with baobab habitats. The long tapered tail of the Meaves starling, they really enjoy being around the main tropical riverine systems through South Africa and Africa, or Central Africa in particular. The lemon-breasted canary, these guys nest in lala palm thickets that only occur along the east coast, and in particular up in this area in Kruger National Park. The gorgeous bushshrike, I think the name is particularly good. The call is fantastic and is often what gives them away. The bright red courgette you'll normally see sticking out through a small thickets because these guys love moving through dense bush. An orange-winged pytilia, an interesting individual. You don't see these guys often at all. Orange-winged pytilias like the dry arid country just a bit further north, particularly Mopani felts, which we're going to go into shortly. One of the most difficult birds to find on occasions, because of their brilliant coloring, when they see you walking up, they turn their back on you and they camouflage the environments around them. An arena trogon. Black-throated waterline. These guys are small insect feeders, normally in dense vegetation, and they particularly like places like mangroves and overgrown edges near rivers. Another difficult bird, normally up in the canopies, an insect feeder, is the eastern nickiter. And then we start moving into some incredible raptors. This is regarded by many as the second biggest eagle that we have in South Africa, after the Marshall eagle. You can see the massive talons, and it just caught his favorite prey species, a vervet monkey. They've got slightly smaller rounded wings, which allows them to navigate through forests and deep vegetation so that they can capture the vervet monkeys. A definite favorite from northern South Africa, the pennant-winged nightjar. And you have an opportunity, if you do a night drive in this particular park, to see this bird. Very similar to the standard winged nightjar. The pennants form out during their breeding season. It's a display for the male, and they literally stream off the end of the wings. And then broad-billed rollers, migrants down to South Africa, intra-African migrants. Very bright, very noisy, often around the edges of lakes and riverine areas. Another skulker in the dense vegetation around the river thickets, the green-capped aramomala. And then we move on to the riverine habitat that we are going to encounter quite often in Kruger. You can see the large sycamore fig trees. If you're looking on the map itself, it's a very large tree on the left-hand side. In those large trees, you're likely to get one of these. This is a sought-after Pell's fishing owl. Now, the Pell's fishing owl, most people struggle to find them. In Kruger, you either have to go to the far north, and if you're lucky, you might see them from a vehicle. Otherwise, you have to take a walk from a couple of camps where these birds are basically habituated and allow you to walk up to them, where they roost in these large trees on the sides of the rivers. And then another interesting individual, a bat hawk. These are crepuscular, so that means they come out in the late evening and early morning, and they specifically hunt bats along the river course. If you go to any of the camps along the rivers, you'll have an opportunity to see these guys, if you're fortunate, hunting bats up and down the river course, back and forth the whole way along. The other feature of this area, I mentioned the basalt area, is that you have baobab woodlands that have formed. You can see the large baobab on the left-hand side of the screen, and this nice big hilly outcrop. And that's a good home for a South African rock python, or South African python. Now, most people are a little bit frightened about snakes. I take snakes to a slightly different level. I'm not frightened of them, in fact, quite fascinated. This guy has no venom. He'll get up to about 6 meters, or about 18 foot in length. And he is a constrictor. He has a row of about 100 teeth on the top and bottom of the mouth. He'll wrap onto a person after he's anchored himself with his mouth, and then he basically squeezes the air out of them, or at least in the imagination. There are no recorded incidents of a python taking humans, but they are quite capable of taking things like impala, which I'll show you a bit later. Then we start getting some specials. With those baobabs that we were looking at, you get the mottled spine-tail and the Bohm's spine-tail. Now you can see both these birds. They've got the very short tail, a very distinctive wing pattern, and they nest in baobab trees. And this is the only area in South Africa where you can get them. They are also exceptionally fast-flying birds, so they are difficult to photograph, but some people have been lucky. An African golden oriole, also possible to see up there. Orioles are nectar feeders, so mainly in summer when most of your trees are producing a good amount of nectar, these guys will be visible feeding off of the nectar. An interesting species, the yellow-billed oxpecker. Now, this individual is normally found just north of Satara camp in the central parts of the park. Although their distribution has started to spread further south, they're originally restricted completely to the north of a place called Shingwedzi, and you wouldn't get them on our normal tours up until recently. These guys have a very stiff tail with strong rectrices that allow them to basically put themselves strongly against an animal with sharp claws, and allows them to then run over the body and look for ticks and parasites, which they feed on. But they are also going to open up wounds and feed on dead and decaying skin, and they'll also take fur for their nests. So they can be quite a pest. And in fact, the animal that is on a giraffe, I've actually seen chase them from the body. Then a bird that most of us South Africans use to attract others. This is a pearl-spotted owlet. They are a diurnal owl, and they basically garner the ire of all the other birds around them. The pearl-spotted owlet, when he starts calling, he'll get all the small passerines coming in to mob him because he raids their nests, and he also occasionally eats the smaller birds, and they just generally don't like him. And that's great to attract in a few birds if they're skulking and hiding away. Another good habitat type that we investigate in these areas is the wetland habitat with lots of reeds, particularly reed edges and vegetation on the edges as well, and a good bit of water. And that'll bring in species like this fantastic individual, a black kukul. They're relatively shy and they don't often show up very easily. They breed in South Africa, but are intra-African migrants. Fantastic bird to see, very difficult to see though. Dwarf bitterns, another intra-African migrant. These guys feed on frogs and the likes on the edge of the water. Little bitterns are resident to us, and they do this fantastic display where if you approach them and they get a little bit fearful, they'll lift their beak up and they'll try to act like the stems in the immediate area. Another intra-African migrant, the African crake, coming into the wetlands where they prefer looking for small insects and the likes. Rufous-winged cisticolas are often found within these wetlands and moist grassland areas, as are croaking cisticolas. Of course, most people get a little bit nervous when they're seeing cisticolas and identifying them. The first key to identifying cisticolas is looking at their habitat and hopefully getting a call. Once you've got the habitat and the call, you can start to look at identifying features. So, for example, the heavy bill on the croaking cisticola, or the rufous wing panels and the rufous cap on the rufous wing cisticola will give them away. Then we start moving into the Mopani veld. You can see the trees surrounding the elephant. Now, the Mopani veld does not have a very high diversity. The vegetation type here, unfortunately, has a large amount of ethylene within it. And the plants themselves, they're not very edible. In fact, the elephants only go there because they eat the bark, which is a very high tannin content. But elephants particularly like Mopanis, and these big males that you see moving through the park are normally found either as individuals or as small bachelor herds that are separate from the breeding herds and move steadily through the park in the northern area before coming back to the breeding herds further south where there's good feeding, so they can look for mates. An interesting resident of the Mopani veld is the Arnold's chat. This male with the white shoulder and white cap. He pops up quite nicely for a good photograph. Insect eaters, him and his mate will have a small territory moving within here. And white-breasted cuckoo shrikes, also a difficult bird to see, normally quite inconspicuous, but favor the miombo and dense broadleaf woodland in Mopani veld. And then we get onto our first mammal, a roan antelope. Favoring dry, arid conditions, very much like the area that we're experiencing. This male roan antelope was seen, and you can see all the yellow-billed oxpeckers on his back. They are grazers in general, and specialist grazers. Then you get one of the smallest birds, in fact, our second smallest bird in South Africa after the Cape penduline tit. This is the grey penduline tit. They are quite widespread over the park, but much easier found up in these northern areas. A species that you won't see in many other areas of the park is the Sharp's grysbok. There are two grysbok in South Africa, and there's also a steenbok in Kruger National Park. But they differ from this individual by the white flecks that you can see on his fur, whereas they have a completely brick red fur on their body. These guys are quite shy, and they generally tend to be rather reclusive. European nightjars are often found in summer, exactly as you see this guy, perched up on a branch, completely horizontal to it. At night, they may come down onto the roads, but generally fly about as a crepuscular species, feeding on insects. Of course, we do get a few raptors in this area, and shikras are relatively common through here, often chasing off the smaller passerines as they move through the spaces. You can see the bright red eye and the lovely barring on the body. And then another grazer for the area, it's our largest antelope in South Africa, is the common eland, this one with a particular youngster. Of course, now we start playing around with a few other snakes, and this individual is one that you don't want to play with too often. It is a Mozambique spitting cobra. Now, this guy can spit directly into your eyes, and they have a 95% accuracy. And the venom is very strongly cytotoxic, with a little bit of neurotoxin in there as well. Basically, cytotoxin breaks down the cells. So if they spit into your eyes, it's going to burn, and you need to wash it out with water pretty quickly. If you look at the snake's neck, you can see the black and pink barring, and that's the easiest way to identify them. And like all cobras, you can see he's spreading a hood, and that's normally a good indication that you need to back away from him, because at that distance, he can definitely get you. They are unfortunately responsible for most of the serious snake bites in South Africa, followed directly by the puff adder. Often they are found in houses where they follow around things like mice, and they will occasionally curl up into bed next to someone who's sleeping, which often results in people being bitten. But thankfully, I've not had that happen. Because you have these guys floating about, the black-chested snake eagle. There are two species of snake eagle in South Africa. They have unfeathered tarsi, which you can't see on this individual, but the tarsi themselves are double-scaled, which allows them to attack snakes and not be bitten and affected by that particular snake trying to bite them, and then they'll swallow them whole while flying off. As we start to progress further south, we start to move into more of a sandy habitat, a grassy habitat, beg your pardon. And we start to get Palearctic migrants like this Montagu's harrier. The Montagu's harrier just moves up and down the area, slowly looking for any birds and the likes that may flush up from the grasslands, literally quartering all over the area. Then we get one of our fastest antelope, the topi. These guys are only found in the far north of Kruger National Park. And then a rather interesting bird, and probably my bogey bird of the park, is the Bennett's woodpecker. They feed on formicine ants, often found at the base of trees, feeding on those ants. You can see the spots on the chest and the spots in the back with a red cap and a red beard, which gives away their species. Water bodies within the park. Here you can see one of the plants I was talking about, enjoying a good wallow in the. And they have recently become homes that have started breeding again in one or two of the habitats. Collared pratincoal are also found in the same water habitats as well. They tend to breed just on the edges of these lakes, and they don't move around too much. But then you also get these guys, the Nile crocodile. They've probably been around for about the same time as dinosaurs. You can see all the teeth in the mouth. The thing that separates him from an alligator is that his fourth mandibular tooth, if you wanted to count it, would be from the back. That goes into a sheath where alligators do not. And speaking about teeth, he has 72 teeth in his mouth, and each of those teeth is independently replaceable at any given moment. He can also feed on something like a wildebeest or an impala, and then he can go for almost a year without having the need for any further meals because they're cold-blooded. Another species that we get quite often in Kruger is the black crake, probably one of the most confiding crakes that we will see. You can see the bright red legs, red eye, and the yellow bill. They often come out in the open pretty freely and like good photographs. And then yellow-billed stork, both at lakes and near rivers. These guys fish with their mouth open, often taking lungfish and frogs, for example. Then we begin to move into the central Kruger National Park. And I can see here that the habitat has changed very, very slightly. The average temperatures here are about 31 degrees Celsius, with a maximum temperature registered at 44 degrees Celsius. In winter, you'll get down to a low of about 10 degrees Celsius on average. The lowest temperature recorded was -2 degrees Celsius, quite a cold morning. And the rainfall has increased slightly as we move south to about 500 millimeters per annum, roughly about 21 inches. The area is dominated by igneous rock layers, and it includes grabo, granite, and basalts. And then traveling south, you start to get a few sedimentary deposits running down the center of the park. Things like shale, mudstone, as well as a few coal deposits exist. And this contributes to rather large areas of dense, mixed broadleaf woodland. You can see the large trees onto the left and right hand side. The one that the elephant is standing under is a knobthorn. It is an acacia, one of the most common acacias that you'll see. And then you have a marula, which is the other green-leaved large tree behind them. The marula tree is a favorite of leopards and produces a fruit called the marula fruit, which has about 4 times more vitamin C than an orange, and is used to produce amarula cream, which is a South African favorite liqueur. In the burnt or low-level grasses, we tend to find these Senegal lapwings. They move down from Africa, as well as having a few residents in the area, and they'll be looking for insects in this particular area. Of course, I mentioned that we have a second snake eagle, and this guy, not quite as pretty as the other, but here you can see his tarsi are completely unfeathered, and that is, as I mentioned, to catch snakes, of which we have a very specialized one next up. So this is the one that strikes fear into the hearts of almost everyone. This is a black mamba. Now you can see the coloring is gunmetal gray. So what gives its name? It is the lining of the mouth is completely black. So when his mouth under threat, he will show a black mouth. The snake itself contains a potent neurotoxin. Without help, a human being bitten by one of these will probably, unfortunately, cease to exist within about an hour and a half, depending on the dose and where the bite is. They use a polyvalent antivenom to treat the bites, so there have been very few deaths since that was introduced in South Africa. But basically, the neurotoxin inhibits the nerve receptors from receiving messages from the brain, and the person will die of suffocation. Of course, they're quite shy snakes, rather retiring. They'll rather go into a small hole or termite mine to escape people. But they tend to hunt things like game birds, large rodents, and the likes, also frogs, for example. Of course, what most people come to South Africa for, and Africa in general, these are 2 parts of a coalition of males, nice big male lions. You can see the big manes around the neck. Those are used to protect those males when they get into fights, but also they're used to dominate individuals. These 2 males are resting up in a riverbed, and they'll, in the evening, cover up to 40 kilometers patrolling their territory so that they know that their pride is protected and that all of the females will be safe, and they will be able to sire cubs and basically keep their prides strong. Coalitions in Kruger range from 2 males up to 6 males. The largest I have heard of on record is the Mapocho males, which finished up about 5 years ago. Those 6 males controlled an entire area of about 32,000 hectares. So probably about 1/5 the size of Kruger National Park. Yeah, it's quite a large grouping. One of our target species is the southern ground hornbill. You can see these 2 individuals, one carrying a few frogs in the mouth, probably going back to a nest. They are now endangered, and they are being watched quite closely by the Mabula Ground Hornbill Support Team. They basically have been going to their nest sites and removing the second nest because unfortunately infanticide is quite an issue with them. But these large prehistoric looking birds, they walk around using their big pickaxe-like bill to take anything from frogs to snakes, but they'll also even kill tortoises by hitting that bill through the shells and breaking the spinal column. So it's quite an imposing bird. Southern carmine bee-eaters come down to us from Central Africa in our summer, and around Satara they're quite common. Beautiful colors. You'll often get them feeding on insects and sitting on the side of the road as you travel through the park during the day. Of course, then we get emerald spotted wood doves, quite a small dove. You can see the green spots on the wings. Those spots are individual. They're like a fingerprint to the individual. And you get these throughout the woodlands in Kruger National Park. Our other oxpecker, the one that is the most common through South Africa, is the red-billed oxpecker. You can see slightly different, completely red bill, yellow wattle with a red eye. This individual is on a rhinoceros, and they tend to follow around large herds of animals, rhinoceros, impalas, kudus, any of these larger browsers and grazers, and that's what they tend to feed on. Exactly like these guys, the African buffalo. Now, most Americans that will get talk about water buffalo. Water buffalo occur in Asia. The African buffalo is a slightly different kettle of fish. These guys are incredibly aggressive. You can see the third individual to the back with a rather large set of horns, this guy here. That is a male. That is what they call the boss on the head, those horns. Below that, he has a fat layer that protects his brain if he decides to charge at something and attack it. Generally speaking, in a herd, they're calm and relaxed, but on foot, you don't want to play around with these guys too often. They are very intimidating, and they are part of the big five, as with the lions, because they were one of the most aggressive and most likely to kill you if you were hunting them on foot. A species that we get quite often, the monotonous lark, call for good reason. That bird calls the entire day and entire night through summer, doesn't stop, continuously going, is incredibly loud. Then another common species through summer, particularly in the grasslands, is the red-billed quelea. There's a male on the left-hand side and a female on the right. And they go into swarms of birds just like this. It's absolutely incredible, the numbers, hundreds of thousands in there. They estimate that the red-billed quelea is responsible for the most damage of crop farms in South Africa. And farmers go to extensive measures to try and stop them swarming like this, including setting fire to entire colonies of birds. Of course, when you get bird species like this in large numbers, you start to get things like lanner falcons, an incredible species, fast flying. He'll go through a flock like that and try and catch them. But of course, the birds are able to manipulate the entire flock movement. They understand how the flock is moving, and they can often outmaneuver him and live to fight another day. The most common and the largest of our brown eagles in the park is the tawny eagle, often seen sitting up in trees. This guy doesn't hunt so much. He's more a carrion feeder. Often we'll get them associating with vultures. They go down to a carcass when the vultures are down there to feed there, although they will still catch things like mice and the likes in the fields. Another relatively common species throughout the park is the black-winged kite, often seen hovering above the grasslands. And you can see in this, he's taken a small four-striped field mouse. She's busy having a good meal of. And then something that most people love to see, this is a bataleur. You can see his wingtips extend well past his tail. They wanted to name this the short-tailed eagle at one stage. And the name bataleur is actually French for entertainer. Because the wingtips are upturned and the tail is short, the bird is off balance in flight, and it actually looks like he's walking along a tightrope. That coloring on the bird takes 7 years to attain from hatching. Then a very common species. Anywhere that there is an acacia, there is a rattling cisticola, and the calls continue the entire day. One of the quickest birds to come in if there's anything like a pearl-spotted owlet, or if there's a snake, they tend to mob anything. They've got a large heart and a lot of attitude. Of course, sticking with the theme, we still have another cobra to go. This is a snouted cobra, the banded phase of snouted cobra. He's got quite a potent neurotoxin, very similar to our black mamba a bit further back, but he's quite a reluctant biter. They don't really get too aggressive. I've handled quite a few of these in my time. Relatively calm, relaxed snakes. Of course, we have to get a few doves, African mourning dove, quite a common species, particularly in the center and north of the park. But the particular bird itself doesn't stretch much further south from here. You get them up to a picnic spot called Shakwane, where this photograph was taken. Absolutely beautiful. Then our largest eagle, the martial eagle. Slightly different to the black-chested snake eagle. You can see the spots on the belly, the big body, dark back, and they've got a massive set of talons on them. They're capable of taking down animals up to the size of small impala, and that Sharp's trace book that we saw earlier would be a prime example. I've also seen them after water monitors as an example. Then a very common species, the grey go-away bird. The name comes from the onomatopoeic sound of go away, quail. Now this particular bird you see all over the place, and they also like to mob raptors and the likes, and there's a lot of them. They are fruit eaters, and they belong to the family that also has the turacos, but because of a particular pigment in the turacos, he is not one. Then we get quite a few cuckoos as well. Now, this is a Jacobin, or pied cuckoo is the old name. Most of these cuckoos are intra-African migrants moving down. This guy is often found in amongst the broadleaf woodlands, as are a few of the game birds, Swainson's spurfowl in this particular case, identified by his red face, red neck patch, and black legs. They're often sitting up in the early morning on the perch, as this guy is doing, and they'll be calling out for their territory. There are lots of sunbirds as well, because the knob thorns in Mayflower attract a lot of birds with a lot of nectar. This is a Mariko sunbird that you're looking at. You can see the nice purple band with a maroon band below it. Then there are some chagras that move around here. This is a brown-crowned chagra. Chagras are relatively easy to see, although glimpses of them are more common than not, with rusty rump and wings as they fly across roads or just shoot up briefly. They tend to eat things like small lizards, insects, and they like to skulk in deep thickets. Another migrant that comes down from the Czech Republic to visit us is the redback shrike. And then we move into the grasslands of Satara. You can see these wide open grasslands with dead trees in the background. Lots of small stunted knob thorns, because the soil layer here has a very shallow rock layer. In this area, we'll get Cory bustards. This is our largest flying bird in the world, although some people say the great bustard is similar in size. This guy can move pretty quickly up into the air and get himself flying. They're quite intimidating in large birds. Of course, we also get spotted hyenas. With the large plains, you're going to get lots of predators, because there's a large amount of prey species. And the spotted hyenas will clean up any carcasses that are left over. Of course, another harrier is also a possibility, another Palearctic migrant, the pallid harrier. These guys basically caught over the grasslands again, looking for any birds or insects that might show themselves. While we also get common ostrich up here, our largest flightless bird, and he's also our fastest, running around on 2 toes. This is a nice male. You can see the dark black coloring. Another favorite, the secretary bird, and he is another one that also likes to hunt snakes. They use their claws, basically they fold them into a knuckle and they kick the snake to death before swallowing it whole. Rather plain but common species, the African pipit is often seen running around in the grasslands catching insects as we move through the area. And then a few seed eaters as well, things like this chestnut-backed sparrowlark. This is a nice male with a big white ear patch. We see them relatively often out in the slightly drier grasslands. We also start to see a few rollers. This is a purple roller. You can see the purple coloring on the wings. When they fly, it comes out as a bright purple on the wings. These guys can take prey up to the size of a chameleon. I've even seen them take small snakes. The name roller comes from the display flight, which I'll explain when we get to the lilac-breasted. Of course, we talk about the big five, but nobody knows about the magnificent seven. And this is basically one of those. It's the big five, plus cheetah and wild dog. They are two endangered species. There are roughly about 4,500 wild cheetah left in the world. Basically, individual males cover large territories looking for females. And unfortunately, in Africa, there's been a bottleneck in populations as a result of humans basically taking up their habitats. And it means that there's been a lot of interbreeding. So what Kruger National Park does, along with the World Wildlife Fund, is they bring in new genetic bloodlines from places like Namibia, particularly with males, and they swap them with reserves in Namibia or private reserves. And that allows the cheetah genetic code to be changed so that you don't get this bottleneck. A cheetah that is brought in has to be monitored for 6 months once it has been released by the World Wildlife Fund, because it is an endangered species, to ensure that the cheetah is surviving and is doing well. It's also the fastest land mammal. It'll reach about 100 miles an hour, relatively short of 3 seconds, and 100 kilometers, so 160 miles an hour, I think it is, got it right. Somewhere in the region of about 4.3 seconds flat out. And you can hold it for about 7 seconds. Of course, we mentioned that there will be kills, and vultures are seen here feeding on a carcass. These are white-backed vultures feeding on a buffalo carcass. They rely quite heavily, though, on another vulture, couple of vulture species, actually. This is a white-headed vulture. All of our vultures have been upgraded to critically endangered, but the white-headed vulture probably is the most affected for habitat loss and also being persecuted. But you can see the very heavy bill on the white-headed vulture. That bill is used to open up a carcass. And it is also one of the only vultures that can actually hunt for itself, catching small rodents, as it has relatively strong talons, like the leopard-faced vulture. The others, their talons are not strong enough to kill anything. Like this small guy, the hooded vulture, can see the very thin bill. Now that particular bill gets in between the knuckles and the joints, and also up onto the, like between the lung bones and the likes, or sorry, the rib bones. Then we have a white-backed vulture, another relatively common species seen throughout the park, often nesting in knobthorn trees. In flight, you can see the primary and secondary extensions are dark in color, and he's got a dark eye when you're looking at him perched. But the other species that we don't see regularly but can be seen in the park is a Cape vulture. You can see the primary and secondary projections are black onto a lightning, almost white on the wings. And the eye is a clear, almost yellow color. And then the big boy, leopard-faced vulture. You can see the very heavy bill, and obviously another bird with a clean head. These guys as well open up the carcass. So normally what happens is when a carcass is identified from one of these vultures, they begin to soar around in a circle, drop to the floor. Normally the white-backed vultures arrive first at the kill, but they can't open it. So then the leopard-faced vultures come in, they open the carcass along with the white-headed vultures. Then your Cape and your white-headed vultures move in, followed by your hooded vulture. Of course, the plains are home to plains zebras. Now, the zebra is very distinctive and is identified by having a shadow stripe in the middle of the white stripe. So he's got black white with a very slight shadow in the middle of that stripe. You can also see a common wildebeest in the back. These two are often associated with each other because they use each other to avoid being predated on by lions, for example. Common button quails are often quite elusive, but we do see them in summer, often running out onto the side of the road from very dense grass, normally when they've been frightened by a vehicle driving past. We also get Temminck's coursers relatively often, scurrying across the grasslands looking for insects. One of my favorite larks, you'd never think a lark is incredible, but the flappet lark, he'll take off and he makes a sound across the sky like as he flies, and eventually he'll land close to a termite mound, which is what he is perched on here. Of course, common wildebeest, all here at a waterhole busy drinking. Common wildebeest are not the cleverest of animals, and in fact, in this part of the park, lions specialize in hunting zebra and wildebeest. Basically, wildebeest tend to run away from lions pretty quickly. They can accelerate quite fast, but they also tend to want to stop and see where prey is basically, or where the predator is coming from, and sometimes that gets them into trouble. But there are a lot of them, and along with the zebras, the lions are very happy to make a meal of one or two of them. Another bird that occasionally gets flushed from the side of the road is the harlequin quail. Again, you wouldn't normally see these birds, but the grass is so long on the side of the road in the middle of summer that they get flushed when a vehicle drives past or when an animal walks past, and you get to get these views. And they're fantastic little birds, little seed eaters. Coming down from Budapest and Hungary, another Palearctic migrant is the European roller. These guys outnumber our local purple and lilac-breasted rollers at the peak of summer. Not quite as colorful, but still beautiful birds nonetheless. One of our targets around Satara is the double-banded sandgrouse. This is a nice male with a black and white chevron on the head. They tend to eat things like grass seeds, new grass shoots, and then in the late evening they arrive en masse at waterholes to drink. And the feathers around the chest are specially developed in the males, so they basically wiggle down into the water, soak up the water into their chest, and then they'll fly back to their nest site, and their chicks will then be able to drink water from them. Of course, throughout the park there are lots of seasonal rivers and streams, and you can see they form little pools as well on the sides of the river. Elephants, leopard, lion, and quite a few other species of animal come down to drink. But along these streams, you get things like orange-breasted bushshrike, beautiful birds, can be very tricky and difficult to see. They feed on a wide array of small insects and vertebrates. Blue-cheeked bee-eaters, again, insect feeders, catching things on the wing, intra-African migrants. Black-crowned chagras, also fantastic birds, very difficult to see normally in the crown of a tree. You normally hear them calling and get brief glimpses. A lesser masked weaver, you can see he's busy building his nest at the moment, so they often build their nests very close to rivers and streams. A clear eye is an indicator that he is a lesser masked weaver. And of course, you get a Diedrich cuckoo. This is a fantastic male. See the bright red eye. Diedrich cuckoos are the parasites of the lesser masked and village, and also the southern masked weaver. They'll arrive at the nest, normally a male flying around to distract the breeding individuals, while the female Diedrich cuckoo pops in the nest, lays her eggs, and then vacates the premises. One of the favorites for most people is the crested barbet. Beautiful amount of colors. This is a nice male, fruit eaters, and often quite tame, so it can be approached very, very easily. Another individual, a grey-headed bush shrike, very large shrike. I've seen these guys taking things up to the size of small frogs. Really, really beautiful individuals. Often in our local culture, they are referred to as ghost birds for their eerie call. Something you don't see too regularly, cutthroat finches, nice male at the front. You can see why he gets the name. Obviously, seed eaters. But they are relatively erratic and move with food sources. So sometimes we get lucky and we get a view of them, sometimes not. These guys are all over the place. It's a greater blue-eared starling. You can see the blue ear extending past the back of the eye. It's the easiest way to identify them. And also a slightly green sheen off of the body. We also get Cape glossy starlings or glossy starling. Beg pardon, Cape starling. And they are very similar, but they have a blue sheen and they don't have that extension on the ear. Our largest owl in the park is a Verreaux's eagle owl, and they're often seen roosting in large trees, in this case a jackalberry tree, on the side of the rivers and streams. And then southern red-billed hornbills. These guys are associated with our fantastic Mopani felt that we were in earlier. As you start getting further and further away from the Mopani felt, the range of the southern red hornbill begins to diminish, and down to the far south of the park, it's actually a relative rarity to see them there. Then, of course, you will have flowering plants, and in this case, they'll attract white-bellied sunbirds, probably one of the most common sunbirds that we'll get in the park, another nectar feeder. And then our smallest woodpecker is the cardinal woodpecker. This one is at a nest, nice male. And then we start to move into the acacia savanna. You can see some giraffes moving in there. They favor the knobthorns. They really enjoy knobthorn trees, particularly as the flowers or the new leaves come up. Giraffes have a fantastic ability to reach vegetation which only really elephants can reach. And that is because the atlas and axis bones at the base of the skull and the top of the spine allow them to put their head up to 180 degrees with their neck. So it just gives them an extra half a meter of reach. For male, that will make them about 5.5 meters tall. So in the acacia savanna, we expect to find things like burnt-necked aeromomola, a small insect feeder. They don't really show the burnt neck very often, unless they're in very fresh plumage. And then another one of our intra-African migrant cuckoos, a valance or striped cuckoo, moving through very quickly. They make a call that sounds almost like you're in a disco or a nightclub. One of our small accipiters, a gabar goshawk, identified by his pink feet and pink cere, a relatively quick flyer. They'll be after small passerines. Probably our most common lark with the bold facial features is a sabota lark. Then into the acacia savanna, we have African scops owls, often roosting up against the trees. Southern giraffe. When southern giraffe come through, these are a nice female that's feeding on the tree. You can see the nice, beautiful coloring. Burchell's starling, another very common and our largest starling. And then we have a bearded woodpecker. It's our largest woodpecker who drums. No others do. Southern masked weavers as well are seen quite regularly in the park, nesting in these areas. This is a red-billed buffalo weaver. The red-billed buffalo weaver is seen quite regularly in the park as well. Scarlet-chested sunbirds also seen quite regularly in the park. And then we enter the southern part of the park, which is dominated by granite outcroppings and lots of broadleafed woodland. And this is where we start to get things like leopard, our other big 5 species, fantastic cat. Often seen up in trees, but are also at home on the floor. It's about 1,000 of them estimated in Kruger. Mocking cliff chat up on the rocks and hills. African goshawks are seen quite regularly in the vegetation, as are Retz's helmet shrikes, which are parasitized by thick-billed cuckoo. Golden-breasted buntings, some good seed eaters that move through the park. And dark chanting goshawks are seen regularly as well, down to the south in the deeper vegetation. Little bee eaters, our smallest bee eater, take insects as they fly about. Then a boomslang, a snake that has a blood-acting venom. There's a monovalent antivenom, but you need to have blood transfusions if the snake bites you. Thankfully, they are placid and do not do any damage. Southern yellow-billed hornbills, quite common, very much like the southern red-billed hornbills, further to the south, and very tame. A woodland brown-hooded kingfisher, beg your pardon, one of the woodland species, insect eaters. And then brown-headed parrots, seen quite regularly as well. And then violet-backed starlings, insect feeders. Then our lilac-breasted roller. When they fly and do their display, they roll across the long axis of their body before landing on a branch. Then we move into the acacia savanna, where we find arrow-marked babbler, very noisy. Crested francolins, fantastic birds, seed and insect feeders. Gray-headed kingfishers, insect feeders as well, and migrants, and trafficking migrants. And then 3,600 of these are left in the wild. These are the African wild dog and critically endangered. Red-crested korhaan, showing up his display at the back of his head. Red-billed firefinch, often eating seeds. Ashy flycatchers. Green-winged pitilias, very similar to his cousin in the north. They like thornfell vegetation. White-throated robin chats. Common scimitar bill. Little sparrowhawk, very good bird to see, small, taking small passerines. Then the common and ubiquitous impala, a food source for many predators. A white-browed scrub robin. Blue waxbills, very common seed eaters. And then our rhinos, white and black rhinoceros. The white rhinoceros, a bulk grazer with a square lip. The black rhinoceros, a hook lip and a vegetation eater, a browser. Golden-tailed woodpeckers, often seen in the south. White-crested trikes, insect feeders, moving along in small families. Red-headed weavers, nesting in large acacias and marula trees. Green wood hoopoes, put their bills in to take insects. Greater kudus, browsers, also found throughout the park. African hawk eagles, raptors that hunt guinea fowl in particular in the park. Fantastic birds to see. And then through the riparian thickets, white-fronted bee-eater and red-faced testicular seen quite often, as well as a few kingfishers, pied kingfisher in this case. A special bird, the African finfoot, very elusive and difficult to find, often moving on the edges of the riverbank. African paradise and southern black flycatchers, often hawking insects. Purple-crested turacos, the name comes from the covering, turacoverdin, which is a copper-based pigment that makes the green coloring. Red-capped robin chat, a common species in the dense thickets. Something that's not so easily seen, African black duck. Half-collared kingfisher, very difficult to find, but every now and again get lucky with one. Yellow-fronted tinkerbird, also another difficult species to find, but occasionally we see them in the dense woodlands. A male and female saddle-billed stork, numbers of these have been decreasing. Are really fantastic birds to find in the wetlands. Bearded scrub robins are restricted to the eastern side of South Africa. And our largest heron, the Goliath heron. And you often get hippopotamus as well, just popping up in the water. And our largest kingfisher, the giant kingfisher. And then, of course, you get a fantastic white-browed robin chat. Yeah. Final sunbird is the collared sunbird. And then African green pigeons eating fruits, along with African fish eagle, which will be taking a huge amount of fish out of the river at any given time. Coming up to our final few birds, white-faced whistling duck, often seen on the edges of the water. White-crowned lapwing, only seen in the park, basically south to Afzal. Monotypic hammerkop. And then we get a chance for a night safari. You get to see things like lions, southern white-faced owls, and pangolins, fiery-necked nightjars, and spotted eagle owl, all under nighttime conditions. And it's definitely worth a visit going out to these places. That's all I have from my side. Thank you for joining me.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Greg. That was wonderful, sharing all of those wonderful slides and yeah, your knowledge of the park. It was excellent. Thank you so much. There's been a bunch of questions that have come through over here, Greg. But yeah, we do have time for some Q&A as well. So let's get stuck into a few questions, shall we?
Go for it.
Great stuff. So, first one here is, how is the park changing with regard to climate change influences? Yes or no?
Really speaking, they have seen a lot more in the way of drought over the last few years. But South Africa in general goes through 7 years of rain, 7 years of drought. But they have definitely started to find that when there's been severe rainfall, for example, it's been really intense. So, for example, they had a hurricane that came over and that gave 21 inches of rain in 36 hours and put the whole place as a disaster zone. And that never used to happen so much. And then, of course, the droughts that have been happening just recently. I mean, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they had a huge drought. And they were actually having to supplement feed a lot of the animals. So the intensity has definitely been a major factor. And you can see it's affecting it.
Yeah, I agree. It does. It feels like it's kind of picked up a little bit. Yeah, as you say, the extremities of, on both sides. Yeah. Another one over here. This is more along the lines of wild dogs. So thanks, Elise, for your question. I know you've got a serious passion for the species. And Elise is just asking, how are the wild dogs doing? What is the current population number in the park? How easy is it to find them? And to be able to watch them interact. And she also knows that Kruger is quite a good place to find them, but what's the best place in Africa to see them, in your opinion, Greg?
I know Botswana has a really good bit with wild dogs, but my personal opinion, if you're going to come to Kruger at the right time of year, probably coming in around about August, September, you've got a really good chance of seeing wild dogs around Afzal, Skukuza, that area. I haven't missed them once in the last 3 years, basically traveling there. And there's a really large set of packs up in the north as well, around Satara. There's a pack of 40 individuals. So it's a really big pack and great to see. The numbers at the moment, they estimate about 400 individuals overall in the park. But they did have a breakdown of population with canine distemper recently. And I do know that they have had a huge amount of work done to try and inoculate the packs that weren't affected at this point. It remains to be seen what's going to happen. But basically, they've got monitors out at the dogs continuously watching what the dogs are doing to make sure that they're not going to get any conflict with humans, which is probably the main issue that they'll face.
Yeah, absolutely. I also heard it's around 400 or so. And I agree, just to add to that, Elise, I was actually in the park in March itself, and we were there for, was it 5 or 6 days before we actually had to leave because we had to evacuate because of this whole COVID issue. But we had, oh goodness, it was sightings every day, sometimes even 2 sightings a day of dogs, and that was also around the Skukuza zone, sort of central in Skukuza. So as you were saying, Greg, yeah, I mean, that is very much a core location for them.
I think they've got breeding sites there, which they monitor. So if you can, that you normally settled.
Yeah. So certainly, Kruger's a very good location. But just, best place in Africa, as Greg said, I mean, Botswana, there's some very good spots in Botswana where you got excellent chances for them as well. And then Zimbabwe too. I mean, Zimbabwe traditionally, those dry Mopani woodlands at Kruger National Park are also fantastic for wild dog too. So, but yeah, always a great sighting, wild dogs. Then another one, just about the vultures, Greg. Just asking, have the vulture populations crashed as in other parts of Africa and India? So, I mean, we know it's been hectic in India what's happened, but we're also starting to see that obviously in Africa, and they're asking, yeah, is it going on in South Africa as well?
It is. The vulture populations worldwide have crashed dramatically. As I say, they've been uplisted to critically endangered, all species in South Africa. Part of the main problem you're facing is the indiscriminate poisoning to try and get things like jackals or to catch small predators. So they'll poison a carcass to try and catch these animals out. And all the vultures obviously come to feed, and you get a massive die-off. It's exacerbated now with the rhino poaching situation. They use a poison called temic. It's also known as two-step on the black market. They paint the carcass in temic, and the vultures come down, and basically in the same process. At one site, they lost 56 vultures to a temic poisoning. So, you know, if you're getting 5 or 6 carcasses, if that's happening, it's intense.
Yeah, it's a massive effect on the population. Yeah, it's very sad what's happening with vultures around the world. As I said, they certainly are crashing in a massive way, sadly, even within the protected areas to some degree. Just a general question, what field guides do you recommend for South African birds and wildlife?
I generally tend to use a mixture of books. At the moment, on my cell phone and my iPad, I've got the Roberts 2 app, and that is fantastic. It's like walking around with the miniature birding Bible in your care. And then in the field, I tend to use the Sasol, which has actually just released the 5th edition. It's the Sasol Birds of South Africa. I just find it quite easy, particularly for raptor reference. I've also got an old copy, I don't know if they still do it, is the Sasol Raptor book. And then for your LBJs, as they put them, you've got the Farnsey Peacock LBJs book, which is outstanding, really, really worth using. So between those books, that's generally what I tend to work with, but mainly off of the app because it's easy to move around with.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. Then another question over here. Tristan's just asking, are there a lot of range-restricted bird species in Kruger National Park? Start off by saying thanks for a great webinar. So really enjoyed it. But yeah, so are there a lot of range-restricted bird species in Kruger? And essentially, so it's a twofold question. What is the proportion of South Africa's key species that a single trip to Kruger would cover roughly?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Look,
yeah, I'm happy to chip in here as well. If you'd like.
As well. There's not much in the way of range-restricted species, really. The habitats in Kruger are generalist, so you don't get as much in the way of endemism. You generally tend to be a more broad spectrum. However, the thing about Kruger is that it makes it easier to get access to more of the general spectrum than a lot of the other places would. Keith, anything else that you've got?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that and say, you know, at Rockjumper, I mean, we've got our mega tour, which is 24 days in length, and that targets pretty much every single endemic in the country. And that trip does not visit Kruger National Park, for example. Although, if you have a look at the South African list, which is, you know, approaching, I mean, what's it? It's approaching almost 900, it's about 870 odd or whatever it is. And Kruger's, you know, 500 species have been seen. So you're looking at well over half of the country's birds can be seen in Kruger. So if you want great general birding, to see a lot of birds and see some fantastic mammals, then Kruger is absolutely a great spot for that. And within a week, you can pick up a massive volume of species. But as far as like South Africa's key birds or endemics, as Greg was saying, or range-restricted species, that's not really what Kruger's all about. You want to be going actually to more of the micro type habitats within South Africa to pick up those.
I think the main thing is we go there for mammals. When we do our Eastern tours, our comprehensive tours, we go in there to tick the mammals off and get those out the way. And then we go into Wackerstroom, which is the range-restricted good zones.
Absolutely, and you pick up a lot of good birds. The birding there is fantastic. The photography is fantastic. The experience is fantastic. You're picking up a lot of widespread great African birds, and sure, it's got a couple of its own specials as well. I mean, birds like Steeling's wren warbler are never easy to see anywhere, you know, in particular birds like cory bustards and southern ground hornbills and some of these large birds as well also. You know, not all over the show anymore, so you need to go to big wild protected areas like Kruger to really see them. And then you never know, sometimes you come across, you know, more scarce birds like half-collar kingfisher or an African finfoot or something like that. So there's always great birding in Kruger. Great. So Simon's just asking here, when's the best time to come to get the to max the bird list to get the most birds in Kruger?
You got to be there in peak summer, so you're going to be there December, January. There's no other choice. If you're wanting the migrants, December, January is the time. Anytime after January, you're starting to already get the movements of species going back north. So that's it. Just, you're going to deal with heat, but you're going to bird well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah. Max bird list without a doubt. Yeah, the summer months is when you want to be there. So yeah, that's sort of October, November, December, and then through the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March. Yeah, probably max it out. Someone just asking here, a tour that ends July 21. Is that a good time to visit Kruger?
Yeah, look, as a generalist tour, that is a good time to visit Kruger. In terms of game, it's very dry, so you get to see a lot of the animals very easily. The vegetation is quite thinned out. And in fact, it's also easy for the birds in terms of seeing them. The difficulty is that the birds won't be in breeding plumage. So a lot of your weavers and the likes are very dull. And that can make identification a little bit challenging for the novice birder. But in general, I think, yeah, if you're good with birds, you know, that's a good time of the year to go. Most of the species I showed on the slide will look exactly like they are. It's not a bad time. It's also cool.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, you got very, very pleasant weather. I mean, it's low altitude, so yeah, I agree. Very pleasant weather conditions, great mammal viewing. And as you say, less leaves around. So I think there's always something to see in Kruger. It doesn't matter what time of the year you're there. You will always have a great sighting. It's one of those places, very special part of the world. I mean, I think for you as well, Greg, you've been visiting since you were a small child.
Tiny.
Right? Yeah, I mean,
look, for me,
you know, we're in the same boat here. We've grown up like with Kruger in our blood, so it's you can just sort of think back on these childhood memories of this amazing park that's given us so much over the years.
You could see trying to condense it all into 45 minutes. But yeah, no, look, if I'm going to the park, if I want to go to the park, I'm going to do it in April. That's the time I really enjoy going to the park. It's just thinning out in the vegetation. Game is good. There's still youngsters about, and you still got some of the migrant species like the stragglers, but all the bird species are still in good breeding plumage. So that's my target time that I'd go personally.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. All right, let's have a look over here. There were a couple of others that came through. Someone's just saying they need a lot of birds for their SA list from Northern Kruger. What's the best time of the year to visit? Obviously summer, they say, but when's best regarding avoiding the summer holidays, most of the rain, and to get the best chance to see all the most sought after birds? February question mark. So he's coming out from London. Obviously, I guess been to South Africa a few times. So
your school holidays are going to end January 10th, normally somewhere around that time. You know more about that than I do at this stage, Keith. But January the 10th, and through to March, the park is dead. There's no one because everyone's trying to pay off, I think, the credit cards and trying to get past Christmas and that initial part of the year as work and the experience is going. So that time is generally perfect. If you get there the middle, end of January, you're going to be good. It's still going to be green. You're still going to be getting rain. But, you know, you need the rain to get those birds in breeding plumage and to get them showing and to get them calling. So for me, if you're going there, you need to do it probably latest end of Jan, early Feb.
Yeah, I agree. I spent a lot of time in Northern Kruger as well during that sort of Christmas, New Year zone, and also sometimes in late November towards that sort of northern part. And also, I mean, excellent time of the year for the specials. So birds like Arnott's chat, you know, birds like thick-billed cuckoo especially. I mean, if you want thick-billed cuckoo, and that's a big target, you want to be there in that sort of early summer zone rather than the late summer zone. So for some species, it's a little bit different, but as Greg says, you know, very much if you sort of time at the back end of January and into February, you've got an excellent chance for a lot of those specials as well. And then you're outside of school holidays. Or I would say time at late November into early December before the school holidays start, you probably also.
I think it's
excellent time
to note as well with the Northern Krugers, it's not as popular with South Africans. So even school holidays, you'll get people in per furry, but you're not going to get that many. Just simply because there's not that much in the way of density of game.
Absolutely, absolutely. The camps are further spread apart and what have you as well. So yeah, as you say, not the density of game, also not the density of camps. So you find density of people just low as well. So Northern Kruger, yeah, if you want a quieter Kruger experience, that is certainly the place to go. Which kind of ties into the next question, Greg. Linda's asking, aren't there too many tourist vehicles that converge on the animals, especially the Big Five and Magnificent Seven?
Look, this is a twofold question. It's a bit of a difficult down. It can get very, very busy. Although when you're looking at how the park works, particularly during the peak seasons, during the school holidays, they try and limit the amount of vehicles that go through. And Kruger have actually now got a designated vehicle group that goes about, and they actually try and move people on. So most people, they get their rush, they see the individual animal, and they generally tend to move on, although you do get a few photographers that hang about. And then the open safari vehicles as well, it's the same type of thing. The open safari vehicles, they are in radio contact. They know when there's a lot of vehicles going on there. And they generally will try and give each other space so that everyone gets an opportunity to rotate through the sightings. Nobody wants to put pressure on these animals. And most cases, the animals are relatively well respected by most people that go there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the beauty with Kruger as well to remember if you're visiting, you know, there's tar roads that go right through Kruger that are well surfaced, and they tend to be frequented as well by most of the tourists. So if a sighting is in that area, you tend to then, you tend to bunch up with cars, and it can get a little bit crowded at a particular sighting. But it's also so easy in Kruger to get off the main divide and get out on a dirt road, or an unsurfaced road into a more remote area of the park, and drive for 30 kilometers, for 20 miles, and just explore Kruger and see what you come across. And you can very, very often be the only car at a leopard sighting or a lion sighting or a cheetah sighting or whatever it might be, and just bird yourself. It's also very easy to get away from the crowds. So yes, you'll see pictures of loads of cars around a particular sighting, but it's not always the case, and it doesn't have to be that way if you choose another option. I think that's also worth keeping in mind. I'm just going to head across over here and see. Sorry, there were a lot of questions in a variety of areas. So just checking these. So another question here: Why do red-billed quellias swarm? Okay.
Generally speaking, just the amount of food source that's available. So they are nomadic with relation to food sources.
Yeah.
And that's one problem with your crop farmers, because they tend to find, all the food's here, so let's all just get in there and eat as quickly as we can. And it's the same thing here. The rains come generally in about November. We used to say about November the 20th, you'd expect rains. I can guarantee within a month, the population of quellias just suddenly increases exponentially. And that's just because they found the food source. And then once that food source is gone, then they just as abruptly move off.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so also, is it possible to see lungfish on the trips?
Yeah, look, we know them as sharp-toothed catfish as well. There's actually documented footage of them walking across the park from dry pan to dry pan during the droughts. So yeah, they are there. You often get to see them, particularly when you're at one of the hides around Satara. You're looking straight down into the water, and you can actually see them swimming underneath. So,
excellent. And then, we've got time for just one more question. I think we're running fairly late over here. Thanks everyone for your patience. What are the chances for seeing some of the more difficult cats like cheetah and serval and leopard?
Leopard, every time I've been to the park, I've had a leopard. It's a very difficult thing to do. Cheetah, for my account, a lot more difficult. You're looking at getting to every leopard, there's a quarter of the cheetah or something along those lines. I think it's 1,000 leopard, there's 400 cheetah or 500 cheetah in the park. So leopard, definitely you've got a good chance. Cheetah, I'd say it's probably a 30-70 chance of getting it. I don't always get that luck, but it's there. I've seen serval quite regularly around Satara on night drives. Not so much in the rest of the park, but mainly that's the habitats that you're dealing with. And then I've also got African wildcats almost every tour in Satara camp itself. You've got that habituated one that occasionally comes in the park. They're relatively easily seen. So they're all there. It's just a case of luck at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Greg, thanks so much. We really appreciate all your knowledge and your time, and for sharing your wisdom of Kruger with us. It was a fantastic slideshow, fantastic presentation, amazing photos. So thanks so much for that. Right, so then next week we are heading off to Papua New Guinea. It's about as exotic as it gets. A couple of weeks ago, Glenn was obviously talking about the remote West Papuan Island cruise. This is completely different zone, the other side of the island of New Guinea. Papua New Guinea, and it really is. It's a place that's captured, I guess, a lot of people's imagination. I mean, a lot of you know about the birds of paradise or have heard or seen something about them, but to go to the island and see over 20 species on a single trip is pretty spectacular. And that's that's Papua New Guinea, and that's what the island offers. There's so many other great families as well: bowerbirds and jewel babblers and owlet nightjars and you name it. There's some very, very exotic species. So Adam Wallane is going to be talking about Papua New Guinea next week, and he is somebody that spent a lot of time in this particular part of the world. In fact, there's probably a few people on the planet that have spent as much time in Papua New Guinea birding and venturing out into some of these unknown places as Adam. He really has done it extensively. So I think next week's webinar is going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be on that very exotic side again. And I think, Adam's going to really treat us to obviously some fantastic photos of some of these species, but I think also some of the stories as well, and dive into some of the fascinating culture and customs of the folks in New Guinea as well. So it's a special part of the world. So definitely one that's not to be missed. And then just a reminder that all the webinars are recorded and can be viewed later, and the links will be available within the next 48 hours. So we'll send those out to everyone that has signed up, and they will also be posted on our website as well. And then just another reminder that these webinars are all being offered free of charge, but should you wish to donate towards our tour leaders, the GoFundMe link is still open, and 100% of those proceeds go directly to our guides. Thank you everyone for joining us again today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, Wednesday at the same time. From all of us at Team Rockjumper, thank you and goodbye.